The air was thick with anticipation. The kind of tension that only a moment like this could create. The political world had been holding its breath, waiting for a move, any move, from Donald Trump. His silence had been deafening. Had been off the radar for weeks, a master of quiet strategy, while everyone around him made their moves. But everyone knew that Trump didn't stay quiet for long. When he moved, it was seismic. The news was already making waves when the first hint of what he was about to do surfaced. It wasn't a tweet. It wasn't an interview. It was something bigger. Something that would send shockwaves through Washington and beyond. Trump had always been a master of the game, but this time, it was different. This wasn't just about politics. It was about power, raw, unfiltered power. And as soon as word leaked out, the question on everyone's mind was clear: what exactly had Trump just done? It all started with a meeting. A closed-door session, no press, no leaks. The kind of meeting that happens when deals are being made in the shadows. The kind of meeting where futures are shaped, and histories are written. But now, the time had come for the world to learn exactly what Trump had done. It was a game-changer, the kind of move that would redefine everything. As the story broke, it was clear: Trump had done what no one expected. The headlines screamed, "Trump just did it, the game will never be the same." The entire political landscape shifted on its axis. The news was staggering, an announcement that would alter the balance of power, not just in the US, but across the globe. Trump, always one to defy expectations, had made a move that no one saw coming, and it wasn't a typical political maneuver. No, this was different. Sources close to the situation whispered that Trump had brokered a massive, behind-the-scenes deal, a deal with some of the most powerful forces in the world. A coalition of business moguls, foreign governments, and political powerhouses. The kind of deal that could flip entire elections, reshape economies, and redraw the lines of global alliances. At first, many dismissed it as rumors. After all, Trump was notorious for his unpredictable tactics. But as the details began to emerge, it was clear: the deal wasn't just a power play, it was a statement. Trump wasn't just playing the game anymore, he was remaking it. Reports flooded in that he'd been secretly meeting with key figures for months, gathering information, making alliances, and crafting a plan. A plan that, when revealed, would make his previous political moves look like mere warm-ups. The ramifications were clear. Those in power were rattled. Those vying for power were terrified. The shockwaves reached far beyond Washington. And yet, Trump remained eerily calm, as if this was all part of the plan. The dust hadn't even settled from the first wave of the news, and already the fallout was staggering. Trump's move had sparked chaos in the halls of Congress, the Senate, and even within the ranks of his own party. No one could quite comprehend the scope of what he had unleashed. One by one, political figures scrambled to make sense of the implications. The Democrats, always on the defensive against Trump, found themselves in a state of shock. Their carefully crafted plans for the next election suddenly seemed obsolete. In fact, many began to question whether anyone could really compete against Trump now. The Republicans, who had once tried to distance themselves from his shadow, were now rushing to align themselves with him once again, eager to ride the wave of power he had just surfed in. The traditional power structures had all been turned upside down, and those who thought they were the kingmakers found themselves suddenly irrelevant. Behind closed doors, Trump's opponents were furious. How could he pull this off? They asked in private meetings. But they knew better than to underestimate him. Trump was a businessman first, and he had always played by his own rules. The rules that had served him well in the cutthroat world of business were now being applied to the most important game of all, politics. Rumors swirled that Trump had made a calculated gamble, a high-risk strategy that was beginning to look like a stroke of genius. What was this move? What had he put in motion? The truth was still hidden. But the world, both political and otherwise, was watching, waiting for the next big reveal. Every move he made now had a ripple effect that could change the course of history. The clock was ticking, and every hour felt like a countdown. Speculation was reaching a fever pitch. Political analysts, pundits, and talking heads on every cable network were doing their best to decode Trump's move. Was it a tactical maneuver for the 2024 election? Was it a bid for even greater power, one that would push him beyond the presidency into something more? Or was it something even more explosive? Then, it happened. Trump finally made his first public statement regarding the move. Standing before a crowd of reporters, cameras flashing in every direction, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I've made the right choice," he said, his trademark smirk dancing across his face. "You'll see. Everything changes now." That was it. No details. No explanations. Just the words that would echo in the ears of every politician, analyst, and strategist. It was as if he had just dropped a bomb in the middle of the room and walked away without looking back. The silence that followed his statement was deafening. But that silence was broken quickly as the first real details of the deal began to leak. Rumors swirled that Trump had forged alliances with key foreign powers, and not just any powers, but rivals and even enemies of the U.S. during his time in office. There was talk of secret trade deals, shadow banking operations, and backdoor political maneuvers that could leave his adversaries scrambling to find their footing. In Washington, the word treason began to be whispered in some corners. A few senators and high-ranking officials openly condemned Trump's actions, saying that his new alliances would endanger national security. Others, however, remained curiously silent, perhaps because they already knew just how deeply Trump had woven himself into the very fabric of international politics. Meanwhile, Trump's allies rallied around him, insisting that he was simply securing America's future, cutting through the red tape of traditional diplomacy to get things done. But the question remained, what was his endgame? And was anyone in a position to stop him? The atmosphere in Washington had shifted from shock to sheer disbelief. Trump, the man who had always played by his own rules, was now a few steps ahead of everyone else. His critics, some of whom had spent years trying to take him down, now found themselves caught in a web of his making. It wasn't just the political ramifications they were grappling with anymore, it was the sense of helplessness that came with realizing they were outmatched. The whispers about Trump's alliances with foreign powers grew louder. Multiple sources confirmed that the deal Trump had orchestrated was not just a political play, it was a financial revolution. Key foreign governments, some of the biggest players in the global market, had agreed to back Trump in ways no one had ever imagined. The implications were almost impossible to grasp, but one thing was clear: Trump had just secured control of a vast financial network that transcended national borders. Inside the Oval Office, Biden and his team scrambled to get a handle on the situation. They had thought they understood the game, but Trump had changed the rules entirely. It wasn't just about power anymore, it was about control over vast financial resources, the kind that could reshape economies. The media, both conservative and liberal, were in a frenzy. Trump's detractors accused him of undermining American interests, accusing him of selling out the country. But those who had long admired his ability to navigate power understood, Trump had turned his enemy's biggest strength, the global system, into his weapon. And as the news continued to pour in about the far-reaching implications of his new alliances, it was clear that those who had once viewed him as a loose cannon were now beginning to see him as the ultimate power broker. Every major corporation, every government agency, every bank, and every international institution was now wondering, what would Trump do next? And could anyone stop him from reshaping the world as he saw fit? The days following Trump's cryptic statement only deepened the sense of uncertainty. Political analysts and pundits on both sides of the aisle could not make sense of it. Trump wasn't just playing the game, he was changing it completely. And while the media frantically analyzed every piece of information that surfaced, one thing became crystal clear: nothing in the political world would ever be the same. Behind the scenes, Trump's allies had begun to mobilize. His influence was growing in ways that even his staunchest supporters hadn't fully anticipated. Key figures in Congress, once hesitant to back him, now lined up to pledge their loyalty. They recognized the power he had seized and knew that standing against him was no longer an option if they wanted to stay relevant. The foreign governments he had aligned himself with were not just mere political pawns, either. They were financial juggernauts, countries whose influence extended far beyond traditional diplomacy. Trump had effectively opened the door for international powerhouses to become his partners, with promises of trade agreements, security deals, and access to markets in exchange for their support. It wasn't just about political power anymore, it was about control over the global economy. It didn't take long for the world to realize the magnitude of Trump's actions. The ripple effects were felt across financial markets, as stocks soared and tumbled in response to the deal. Some analysts predicted an impending global financial shift, one that could make Trump the most powerful figure in the world, far beyond what anyone had ever imagined. Yet, even as Trump appeared to be on the verge of complete global domination, cracks began to show in his alliances. Not everyone was happy with the new order he had created. Some of his foreign partners, while eager for the financial opportunities he offered, began to question the long-term risks of such an arrangement. And closer to home, some of his staunchest allies in Congress began to express concerns that Trump's ever-expanding influence might be more dangerous than they had initially believed. But Trump, ever the master of the game, knew exactly how to handle these whispers. He continued to keep a low profile, letting others scramble in the aftermath of his decisions, all while he silently expanded his empire. One thing was certain, no one could ignore him now. The tension in the air was palpable. Every political move, every business decision, every international development seemed to be linked to the seismic shift Trump had set in motion. His next steps were a mystery, but the consequences of what he had already done were becoming increasingly clear. He had done more than just change the game, he had rewritten the rules entirely. In Washington, those who had once tried to challenge him found themselves questioning everything they knew. Senate hearings were filled with debates over the legality of Trump's actions. Was he overstepping? Was he acting against national interests? And yet, every time a new challenge emerged, Trump was one step ahead, using the very tools his opponents had once wielded to strike back with devastating efficiency. The media, too, was caught in the whirlwind. Stories emerged daily, each one more explosive than the last. Trump's financial empire was expanding beyond the U.S., and his influence was seeping into markets around the world. Countries that had once been wary of his political tactics now saw the economic power he controlled and began to make overtures, offering him more deals, more influence, and more access to the global stage. But there was a darker undercurrent to it all. As Trump's network of power grew, so did his enemies. Even some of his closest allies began to wonder how much of this newfound power was truly in America's best interest. Could Trump's alliance with foreign powers and his stranglehold on global markets eventually backfire? What would happen when those who had supported him started asking uncomfortable questions about the future? Back in the U.S., the political elite was divided. On one hand, the wealthy and the corporate powers were thrilled with the opportunities Trump had created for them. On the other, there were whispers in the halls of Congress, in the White House, and within government agencies. Could this be the beginning of an unprecedented consolidation of power that could threaten the very foundations of American democracy? But Trump wasn't worried. He knew the game better than anyone. And right now, he was playing it with the kind of ruthless precision that only someone of his experience could manage. The world was on the edge of its seat, waiting for the next move. What would Trump do with this overwhelming power? Would he consolidate it into something even greater? Or was he preparing to leverage it for something yet unknown, something that would make the entire world bow to his will? The final piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place. As Trump's empire grew, so did the speculation. The power he had seized, both financially and politically, was unlike anything the world had seen before. His rivals, once emboldened by their belief in the system, now found themselves desperate. It was no longer a question of whether Trump could be stopped, it was a question of whether anyone could keep up. Trump had positioned himself as not just a political figure, but as a global force. He had played the game like no one else could, moving through international negotiations and corporate takeovers with an ease that left his detractors in awe and fear. The rules of engagement were no longer the same, and neither was the political landscape. The traditional checks and balances that once held power in place had been destabilized. The moment of truth came when Trump, in his characteristic fashion, issued a single statement that would seal the deal for the final time. "I've done it," he said, his voice calm, almost matter-of-fact, as he stood before a sea of cameras. "The world will never be the same. But I always knew it was meant to be this way. The game has changed. And now, I'm the one who decides the rules." Those words would echo through history. The fallout was immediate and unstoppable. Global markets, political structures, and the very fabric of international relations were reshaped as Trump's alliances bore fruit in ways unimaginable just months earlier. His grip on power was unparalleled, and while his critics continued to claim he had overreached, there was no denying the sheer scale of his success. Some called it tyranny. Others called it genius. But in the end, there was only one undeniable truth: Trump had won. Not just a battle, not just an election, he had won the game, and the world was left to reckon with the new order he had created. And as the dust settled, one thing was certain: no one would ever play the game the same way again. The world would never be the same.